Okay, let's actually hit record this time. Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. It is another painting video, so feel free to pick up a pencil or a stylus and paint along. As I'm sure you figured out by the title, I am redrawing my old art today. I think it's really fun to go through old art and see how far you've come, and to look at all your past terrible, terrible decisions. But we're not talking about that in today's video. I chose a piece that is a little less horrifying. Okay, I think the main problems with this piece stand out right away. It is clearly unfinished. There is no sky in the background, and the overall colors are just so saturated. The water just looks weird, and the tree leaves are like round brushstroke painted over a stamp brush, like a fluffy stamp brush. I think I made that brush actually. I think that brush I made in Krita or MediBang? I think this whole piece was done in Krita or MediBang, but I think that fluffy brush I made. I could be wrong. Anyways, I hope I made it because it's not a very good brush. So first I needed to determine how much of the composition I was going to change. I started with a few thumbnails and ultimately landed on a basic, just straight shot of the dragon sitting under the tree, no weird diagonal downward angles that I was trying to do in the original piece. After some resizing and cropping, I created a new layer to create a cleaner sketch. I don't usually do this, but I'm attempting to stay somewhat true to the original piece, so creating that clean sketch just helps me make sure that I am following something that looks somewhat close to the original. Okay, so I started painting with the gouache brush that Procreate already has. I don't think I've made any changes to it. I started blocking in the color using very desaturated color, staying super close to that gray on the color wheel. Having the reference material right beside my piece made it really hard to judge the colors that I was putting down. I think looking back, I would have hid the reference more often. That way I could focus on my colors on the piece that I was painting now instead of looking at the very oversaturated colors of the original. Of course, I wanted to approach this painting with my new brushstroke kind of style. In the past, I was really inspired by clean, almost realistic art. Like, you know those paintings that have photo textures kind of overlaid on them and everything's really clean and readable? I used to be really inspired by those pieces. And so, not saying that this piece is anything like them, but I used to use a lot of clean lines. I don't think there's anything wrong with painting like that, but it's been 4 years and my tastes have changed, and I like a more expressive, brushworky kind of style, verging slightly on impressionistic. I like to paint brushstrokes that are visible in my painting, and where sometimes, you know, your brain kind of has to fill in the blanks. I don't think I did that so much with this piece. This piece is very readable. There's not a lot of abstraction to it. But I think that was just because I was still trying to stay close to the original, and so I ended up making it still pretty clean while still staying true to my brushworky style now. I went back and forth on the texture of the tree. I think I even flipped my canvas upside down for a while, trying to just abstract the rest of the piece so I could focus on the foliage. Okay, so I forgot to screen record the water. I painted it just like the rest of the piece using the same one brush, just making it darker as it got closer to the viewer and lighter as it went closer to the dragon. And I painted on lots of highlights, and then of course the lily pads with the lotus blossoms or water lilies. I'm not sure what they're called, or if those are both their names, I don't know. I wanted the water to be somewhat green like in the original piece, but ultimately it ended up looking pretty blue. The green water in the original just didn't look right, and so I think the blue water made more sense with the very blue sky. Trying to be realistic as I paint a purple dragon under a very pink tree. The original dragon had bright blue spikes on it, but I think they just looked awkward. I think the reason I painted them so bright blue is because in the original, they're right next to that green water, and 4 years ago, I was trying to make the spikes pop from the water, and so instead of, changing the color, I just made them extra saturated, because that's what we do. There was actually a lot I didn't like about the original dragon. I think it was really too dark and too pink at the same time. With the original dragon, it was hard to tell what was shadows and what was markings, so I think I mainly scrapped all of that and just made the dragon one flat, light purple color. That way it'd be easy for me to shade and add highlights without it looking kind of weird. I guess the belly of the dragon is a different color, but it's close enough to the purple that I don't think it was going to be that hard to shade. And it's all kind of in shadow anyway, so I didn't really worry about it. Another thing I didn't like about it is that the scales were like really, really detailed for being so far away. I think I ended up still making the scale somewhat detailed in this piece, but because it's all like kind of chunky brush strokey style, it works better than just having like this flat colored piece and then these really detailed scales on the dragon. Shading this piece overall was hard because of the really strong sunlight and the shadow from the tree. I think I wanted to add some dappled shadows, but in the end I think it was just too difficult to do at this angle. And the sun, I didn't know if it made sense to add dapple shadows. To be honest, I don't think the lighting in this piece makes a lot of sense, but that's okay. The foliage was mainly done with just blobby brush strokes. Nothing really special, just making sure that the brush strokes went in the direction that made sense for the foliage. The lotuses, or water lilies, were the hardest part of this whole piece, I think. They don't look perfect, but in the end they were not as noticeably off. I think the hardest thing with them was just getting all their petals and looking like they're going the right direction and shading between them without it looking too dark. Thankfully, they're not the main part of the piece, so, if they're looking a little off, that's okay, they're not the focal point. You'll see that I flip the canvas often, and you'll probably notice that the dragon is kind of leaning more to one side than the other. This is something I could have fixed in the sketching stage if I had flipped my canvas more and noticed it, but this far into the painting, there was no real fixing it without having to repaint a lot of it, so I just kind of added a lot of foliage behind it to kind of hide it a bit. But when the painting's flipped right side way, you don't really notice it so much. That's just something that I need to remember for the future, and so I don't make that mistake again. So flipping your canvas is always a good idea. So I originally tried to hand paint all of the shadows, but to be honest, I was just getting confused with where I should actually draw that shadow line, and so I ended up using a lot of lighting layers, like overlay and color dodge and multiply, just to make it so that the mood and the light looked closer to how I had pictured it. Oh, you also see that I will use the automatic selection tool because this is all one layer. So I have to select certain areas so that I can make sure to only put shadows in those areas and not have them bleed all over the whole piece. I actually found I didn't push the contrast enough, so I go into the curves filter and start playing with those a little bit just to push a little bit more of the contrast. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Bye!